tries to leave, that the boy has arranged his pebbles in a perfect spiral on the floor, and that it is, in its strange way, beautiful. You step back out into the village. The air is cold, the stars are very bright, and somewhere, not far away, a bell is ringing. Follow it. The bell rings again, clearer now, pulling you forward through the cold dark toward whatever comes next in this long, strange history. The bell rings at midnight, and it rings at 3 in the morning, and it rings at 6, and at 9, and at noon, and at 3 in the afternoon, and at 6 in the evening, and once more at nightfall, 8 times a day, every week, every month, every year, for centuries. The bell does not care if you're tired. The bell does not care if you're sick. It rings regardless every time without mercy or pause. The bell does not care if it is Christmas, or if the plague is at the gate, or if the king has ridden up demanding hospitality. The bell rings, and when the bell rings, you move. You're walking up a muddy path toward a Benedictine monastery somewhere in Central Europe. It could be the 11th century, the 12th, or the 13th. The rule of St. Benedict governs every minute of life inside these walls. It was written in the 6th century and barely changed for 1,000 years. That is not a typo. 1,000 years of the same schedule. The same expectations, the same rhythm of prayer and work and silence. Imagine writing an employee handbook still followed word for word after 1,000 years. That is what Benedict of Nursia accomplished, and whether he knew it or not, he may have accidentally created one of the most autism-friendly environments in human history. Here is the schedule. You wake at midnight for matins, the longest prayer service of the day, psalms and readings in the dark while the world sleeps. Then you go back to bed briefly until 3 in the morning when the bell calls you to Lauds, then sleep again until prime at 6. Then terce at 9, then sext at noon, then none at 3. Prime at 6 marks the true beginning of the working day for every monk. Then vespers at 6, then compline at nightfall, the last prayer of the day, after which the great silence begins, and no one speaks until morning. Between prayer hours you work, you eat, you read. Everything happens at the same time every day, governed by the bell, structured down to the quarter hour. The Benedictine motto is ora et labora, pray and work. The entire architecture of monastic life is designed to eliminate uncertainty and remove the need for decision-making. It creates a world in which you always know exactly what you're supposed to be doing, and exactly when you are supposed to be doing it. Now, if you know anything about autism, your ears just perked up. What you have just described is a rigidly structured environment with predictable routines and minimal social demands. Long periods of silence, repetitive activities, clear rules, and a bell that tells you exactly when to transition from one activity to the next. This is essentially a therapeutic environment designed by a 6th century Italian saint who had never heard the word autism and would not hear it for another 1400 years. Think about what monastic life removes. It removes the chaos of the marketplace, the unpredictability of secular social life, the constant demand to read social cues, and the constant demand to navigate complex relationships, make small talk, and perform the 1,000 tiny acts of social theatre that neurotypical people do without thinking. In the monastery you do not need to make small talk. In fact, you are forbidden from making small talk. Many Benedictine houses observed strict silence outside prayer hours. Even where conversation was permitted, it was regulated, purposeful, and brief. Idle chatter was a sin. The rules handled the weight of every social interaction so you did not have to. Think about what a relief that would be for someone who has spent their entire life struggling with conversation, who never knows when to speak or what to say, or how to read the expression on another person's face. In the monastery, that struggle simply vanishes. The rules handle everything, every hour, every day. The work that monks did, copying manuscripts, tending gardens, brewing beer, crafting illuminated letters, these were repetitive and detail-oriented solitary tasks that rewarded focus and patience. Tasks demanding the ability to do the same thing, over and over and over with exacting precision, for years on end, without complaint or boredom. The primary intellectual labour of medieval monasticism was essentially a special interest turned into a vocation. You find one thing, you do it deeply, you do it beautifully. You do it for God, and nobody tells you that you are too intense or too focused, or that you need to lighten up or be more social. They tell you that your focus is holy. They tell you that your dedication is a form of prayer. They tell you that your quality of mind makes you blessed inside these walls. Historians still argue whether monasteries deliberately attracted neurodivergent individuals, or whether it was simply a happy accident of structure. There is evidence on both sides. Medieval families often gave their unusual children to the church, a practice called oblation, in which a child was dedicated to a monastery at a very young age. Sometimes as young as 5 or 6. The reasons were varied: too many children, not enough food, a desire for spiritual merit, or a child simply too different for village life. The monastery was a socially acceptable place to put a child who was different, and unlike the fairy hill or the hot shovel, It was a place where that child might actually thrive. On the other hand, monastic life was genuinely hard, and not everyone who entered adapted well. The historical record is full of monks who struggled, who ran away, who broke the rules, who fought with their brothers and were driven mad by the silence and the repetition. For every monk who found peace in the routine, there was probably another who found it suffocating. The monastery was not a paradise for all, and we should be careful about romanticising it. Not every mind found peace within those walls. But here is a quirky tidbit. Many Benedictine houses developed elaborate systems of hand signals to communicate during periods of silence. At Cluny there were over 100 standardised signs. Bread, wine, fish, book, candle, come, go, stop. The monks created a visual communication system that bypassed the complexities of spoken conversation and reduced it to its most concrete elements. If you struggled with the ambiguity of spoken language, with tone and implication, and the unspoken rules of conversation, a system of clear, unambiguous hand signals would be a godsend. Literally. You're inside the monastery now. The walls are thick stone, cool even in summer, and the air smells of beeswax and old wood and something purple. The cloister is a square of open sky surrounded by covered walkways, and monks move through it silently, their sandals whispering on the stone. Nobody looks at you, nobody greets you, nobody expects anything of you except that you be quiet, follow the bell and do your work. The bell rings. It is time for sext, the midday prayer. You follow the monks into the chapel and stand in the dim golden light. Around you, voices rise in plainchant, this same melody sung in this same place at this same hour for hundreds of years, so predictable and so beautiful, that you feel something in your chest loosen, some knot of anxiety you did not even know was there. This is what structure feels like when it is not punishment. This is what routine feels like when it is not prison. This is what the medieval world accidentally offered to minds that craved exactly this. The chant ends, the silence returns, and the bell, faithful as always, tells you what comes next. What comes next is the scriptorium. Follow the corridor to the left, through the heavy oak door into the room where the real magic happens. This is where it all began. The room is not large. It is long and narrow, with high windows on one side that let in as much light as a medieval architect could manage. Which is to say, not quite enough. You will squint here. Everyone squints here. After a few years, most monks in this room will need reading stones. Polished pieces of beryl or quartz that magnify the text. The medieval ancestors of reading glasses. Some of them will go half blind. They do not stop working. There are wooden desks arranged in rows, each one angled like a drafting table, and at each desk sits a monk with his head bowed low over a piece of vellum. Vellum is animal skin, usually calf or sheep, scraped and stretched and treated until it is smooth enough to hold ink, and it is expensive. A single Bible might require the skins of 250 calves. You do not waste vellum. You do not make mistakes on vellum. And if you do make a mistake, you do not cross it out or start over. You take a small, sharp razor and scrape the error away, carefully and delicately. One thin layer of skin at a time until the surface is smooth enough to write on again. Then you write the correct word and you move on. You do not think about the hour you just spent fixing a single letter. There are 600 more pages to go and you will be working on this book for 3 years. Welcome to the scriptorium. The rules here are strict. You may not speak. You may not hum. Silence is the first and absolute law of this room. You may not tap your fingers or shift in your seat or make any sound that might distract the other copyists. The work requires absolute concentration. The penalties for breaking that concentration are real. In some houses, a monk who ruined a page through carelessness could be put on bread and water for days. The text you are copying is sacred. You are not writing words on a page. You are preserving the word of God letter by letter, stroke by stroke. Every error is not just a mistake, but a small act of desecration. And yet, here is the thing that most people miss when they think about medieval scribes. For some of the monks in this room, this is not punishment. This is not drudgery. This is the best part of their day. This is the part where everything else falls away, where the noise in their head quiets, where the world shrinks to the size of a single line of text. They enter a state of focus so deep and so total that hours pass like minutes, and the bell for Vespers startles them every single time. You're watching a monk work. His name does not matter. Let us call him Brother Marcus, because every scriptorium needs a Brother Marcus. He is copying the Gospel of John, and he has been copying the Gospel of John for 14 months. He is on chapter 17. He will not finish this book for another year and a half. When he does, he'll begin another one. He's been doing this for 22 years. He is very, very good at it. Watch his hands. The quill moves with a steadiness that borders on mechanical, never faltering, never hesitating across the vellum. Each letter is formed the same way every time, the same angle, the same pressure, the same tiny flick at the end of each stroke. He's not thinking about the words, not consciously. He knows this text so well that his hand moves almost on its own, the way a pianist's fingers move across familiar keys. His world has narrowed to the width of the cutout window in the parchment that covers his work, a small rectangular opening exposing only the line he is currently copying. This is a real device that medieval scribes used, a frame that limited their field of vision to a single line of text, reducing visual distraction and helping them maintain their place. It is, without exaggeration, a medieval version of a focus tool, a physical accommodation for the demands of sustained attention across hours of meticulous copying work. Brother Marcus does not find this work boring. He finds it peaceful and necessary, the way breathing is necessary, the way stillness is necessary at the end of a long day. When the bell rings and he has to stop, there is a moment, a brief, involuntary flinch, where the interruption physically pains him. Then he puts down his quill, covers his work, and goes to prayer. And when prayer is over, he comes back and he picks up where he left off, and the piece returns. Not every monk felt this way. And we know this because of one of the most delightful quirks of medieval manuscript culture, the margin complaints. Monks were forbidden from altering the sacred text they were copying, but the margins were sometimes treated as a kind of private notebook, a place where a scribe could scratch a few words that no one would read for centuries. And what they wrote there is so human, so raw, so perfectly recognisable across 700 years of distance. It makes you want to reach through time and pat them on the back. Oh, my hand. That one shows up a lot in the margins. Writing is excessive drudgery. It crooks your back, it dims your sight, it twists your stomach and your sides. One Irish monk wrote, "New parchment, bad ink. I say nothing more." Another scribbled, "Now I have written the whole thing. For Christ's sake, give me a drink." One particularly desperate soul simply wrote, "Oh God, this vellum is hairy," which sounds like a complaint about the writing surface, but could be a metaphor for his entire life. And there is a famous marginal note from a 9th century Irish manuscript, where the monk stops his copying to write a short poem about his cat, Panga Ban, who hunts mice while the monk hunts words. It is one of the most beloved poems in the Irish language, written in the margins of a theology textbook by someone who was supposed to be working. These margin scribblers, these frustrated monks, they are the ones for whom the scriptorium was a cage. The repetition was torment, the silence was oppressive. The years of copying the same kinds of text over and over felt like a slow death of the spirit, and their complaints are valid and vivid and funny and sad. But the monks who did not complain, the ones who left no margin notes because they were too absorbed in the work to think of anything else, those monks fascinate me. The ones who spent decades at the same desk producing page after page of flawless identical text, whose handwriting stayed so consistent that scholars can barely tell early work from late. Those monks are the ones who make you wonder. Because that level of sustained repetitive focus, finding deep satisfaction in the exact same task every day for decades, that is not common. That is not the default setting for the human brain. That is something specific, something unusual, something we have a name for now, even if they did not then. Historians still argue whether the great medieval manuscripts were products of devotion, compulsion, or some combination of the two that resist easy categorization. The Book of Kells, the Lindisfarne Gospels, the Winchester Bible, works of staggering detail and patience. The monks who created them are largely anonymous. We do not know their names, we do not know their stories, we only know what their hands produced, and we can see what those hands were capable of producing. And what their hands produce suggests minds capable of a kind of focus that most people cannot sustain for an afternoon, let alone a lifetime. You step back from Brother Marcus's desk. He does not notice you leaving. He does not notice much of anything right now except the curve of the letter he is forming. The smell of the ink, the scratch of the quill on skin, the cutout window framing his entire world. The bell will ring eventually. Until then, there is only this. You close the scriptorium door gently behind you. The corridor is cool and quiet. Somewhere in this monastery a boy is arriving for the very first time. He is enormous for his age. He barely speaks. His fellow students will make fun of him for years. His teachers will assume he is stupid. They are all going to be very, very wrong. The boy stands in the courtyard and says nothing and thinks everything, and the night closes softly around him. The boy is huge. That is the first thing anyone notices about him, and for a long time it's the only thing most people bother to notice. He's tall and broad and heavy, with the kind of frame that suggests he should be hauling timber or working a forge, not sitting in a lecture hall. He moves slowly and speaks rarely. When he does speak, his words often seem disconnected from whatever conversation is happening around him. It is as if he is responding to a question that was asked 3 hours ago, or perhaps one that has not been asked yet. His classmates at the University of Paris, clever young men who pride themselves on quick wit and rhetorical skill, find him absolutely hilarious. They call him the dumb ox, and they do not mean it kindly. His name is Thomas. born in 1225 in southern Italy. He was born in the castle of Roccasecca near Aquino in what is now southern Italy, to a wealthy and powerful family that had very specific plans for him. He was supposed to become the abbot of the prestigious Benedictine monastery at Monte Cassino, a position that would bring honour and political advantage to the family. Instead, at about 19, Thomas announced he wanted to join the Dominicans, wandering friars who preached and begged for food across the land. This was the medieval equivalent of telling your parents you were dropping out of law school to join a garage band. His family was horrified. His brothers kidnapped him and locked him in the family castle for nearly 2 years. According to one account, they even sent a woman to his room. They sent her to seduce him out of his vocation. Thomas reportedly chased her out with a burning log taken from the fireplace. Whether or not it actually happened, that story tells you something about the intensity of his convictions and his general approach to unexpected social situations. He eventually escaped, or was released, or his mother finally gave in, accounts vary, and he made his way to the University of Paris. There he studied under Albertus Magnus, known as Albert the Great, one of the most celebrated and brilliant scholars in all of Europe. And it was there, in the lecture halls and disputations of Paris, that the nickname stuck, the dumb ox, the big, silent, strange young man. He sat in the back, said nothing, and seemed to his peers to be utterly out of his depth, a dull ox in a hall of quick minds. There is a story, told so many times in so many versions that historical truth is probably buried under layers of hagiographic polish. Thomas was so quiet in class, so apparently unresponsive, that his fellow students assumed he simply could not keep up with the lessons. One classmate, feeling generous, offered to tutor Thomas, to go over the lesson material carefully and help him understand the difficult passages. Thomas accepted quietly, and the tutoring sessions began. They continued for some time, with Thomas saying almost nothing at all throughout each one. Then, during one session, the would-be tutor got confused by a difficult passage and simply could not work his way through it. Thomas, who had said almost nothing during these sessions, calmly and methodically explained the passage with startling depth and precision. He kept explaining, unspooling the logic of the argument until the tutor sat there with his mouth open. The sessions ended after that. Albert the Great figured it out first. The historical record suggests Albert noticed something in Thomas that everyone else had entirely missed. Not stupidity, but a different kind of intelligence. One that operated on its own timeline and moved at its own remarkable depth. The famous quote attributed to Albert, and we should be careful with quotes attributed to medieval figures since they accumulate embellishments like barnacles, is this: "You call him the dumb ox, but I tell you that this ox will bellow so loud that his bellowing will fill the whole world." Albert was right. Thomas Aquinas went on to produce the Summa Theologica, one of the most important philosophical and theological works ever written. It is a comprehensive synthesis of Christian theology with Aristotelian philosophy, still studied, still debated, still foundational to Catholic thought nearly 8 centuries later. He wrote millions of words. He dictated to multiple scribes simultaneously on different topics, switching between them without ever losing his train of thought. His memory was described by contemporaries as essentially perfect. He could recall entire books verbatim after reading them only a single time. He claimed to have memorized the entire Bible. Now let us talk about his traits, with full honesty about what we're actually doing here. We cannot diagnose Thomas Aquinas. He has been dead for 750 years. We cannot interview him or observe him in any way. What we can do is look at the descriptions that survive, written by people who actually knew him, and notice patterns that are interesting. The silence. Thomas was not merely quiet, he was described as profoundly, almost pathologically silent, especially in all ordinary social situations. In lectures and disputations, where other scholars competed fiercely to be heard, Thomas often said nothing until he was directly called upon. He did not banter. He did not charm. When thinking, which was most of the time, he retreated into a complete and total interior world. The focus. Thomas's ability to concentrate on a single intellectual problem for extended periods was legendary even among medieval scholars, who were not lightweights. There are accounts of him becoming so absorbed in thought that he would miss meals and prayer services, utterly oblivious to people speaking directly to him. At a dinner hosted by King Louis IX of France, Thomas sat in complete silence for the entire meal, lost entirely in his own thoughts. He suddenly slammed his fist on the table and announced, "And that will settle the Manichees!" startling every single guest at the royal table. He had been working out a theological argument in his head the entire time, paying no attention whatsoever to the king, the food, or the occasion. Louis, to his credit, immediately called for a scribe to take down whatever Thomas had just figured out while seated at the royal table. The routine. Thomas's daily life, once he had established himself as a scholar, followed a rigid and entirely invariable pattern repeated for decades. He said Mass early in the morning, then attended another Mass, then lectured, then dictated, then ate sparingly and without apparent interest in food. Eating sparingly was unusual in an era when meals were one of the primary forms of social interaction and entertainment among medieval scholars. He prayed, then dictated more,